We'll turn it back over to Paul.
All right. Well, yesterday was St. Patrick's Day, so I got a prayer from St. Patrick. I'm going to pray it. It's very Trinitarian and very Christocentric. That part of Dante will come out especially when we meet in April, when he will see the Trinity and Christ in the final canto of Paradiso, but that's for our last session. But for now, let us pray. I arise today through a mighty strength, the invocation of the Trinity, through belief in the threeness, through confession of the oneness of the Creator of creation. I arise today through the strength of Christ's birth, with his baptism, through the strength of his crucifixion, with his burial, through the strength of his resurrection, with his ascension, through the strength of his descent for the judgment of doom. Christ with me, Christ before me, Christ behind me, Christ in me, Christ beneath me, Christ above me, Christ on my right, Christ on my left, Christ when I lie down, Christ when I sit down, Christ when I arise, Christ in the heart of every person who thinks of me, Christ in the mouth of every person who speaks of me, Christ in every eye that sees me, Christ in every ear that hears me. And we'll just take a few seconds of silence. Just want to close your eyes and meditate. Just become aware of your breath. I want to thank Chad again for helping us get organized and technologically in place. I want to thank all of you for showing up on an evening. Some of you are all the way in Taiwan or Honolulu. Last time we did begin to talk about the meaning of purgatory. For many of us, most of us, it becomes a good allegory for the Christian calling of sanctification in this life. It's that yearning that people have to kind of remake themselves. It entails a kind of therapy, practices, prayers, and it's communal in emphasis, unlike the Inferno, which is so isolated. And that's why today we're going to have some polyphony, some voices that we haven't heard. We're going to go up the mountain now officially of Mount Purgatory. And when we get to the top, we're going to get a wonderful, presentation, 10 minutes from Dr. Brian Lammert, who has some images and some things to tell us from a psychiatric point of view of how Dante gives us insight into the psychological maladies and traps that we can find ourselves in, and perhaps how we can find our way out. We know that in purgatory, there's this great emphasis upon freedom. Statius in Canto 21, verse 158, says, the soul surprises itself. It knows when it's ready to leave. Ferese says in Canto 23 that we have a yearning to experience the penance because it unites us with Christ on the cross. So, I'm thinking of that verse in Galatians, no longer I who live, but Christ in me. Sometimes one wonders, I read that prayer of Patrick, where is Christ in the Commedia? And that's a question we might want to take up more fully when we meet again in April. But for now, we're going up 3 steps. And those 3 steps are the steps of confession, penitence, and penance. And if I can, I'm going to ask Alex and Lorna to not only turn their microphones on, but actually to raise their hands so they appear right at the top of the screen. I'm doing the whole view here. So if you can do those 2 things, turn your mics on. They're going to take us into cantos 10 to 12, which is about the sin of pride. And I'll stop now and let you guys take it away.
Okay. Good evening. In Purgatoria, Terrace 1, Dante illustrates pride not only as a sin, but as a vice which mistakes excellence for complete superiority. With pride as the first terrace, It is the heaviest and deepest sin where the soul must redirect love toward God.
The sin being purged here is pride and burden of self. The proud souls are condemned to carry heavy stones on their backs that force their bodies into a humble posture. While this is quite fitting in the physical sense, as revealed by Umberto when he says that the stone tames the hauteur of his once proud neck, Dante also uses the punishment as a form of contrapasso or poetic justice. Carrying such weight requires the souls to keep their heads bent low, which directly contrasts their prideful posture while alive. Odorisi, a prideful manuscript illuminator, confirms that arrogance like this one pays a fee, stating that his heart's desire was excellence and he would still not be in purgatory if he had not, while having power to sin, turned back to God.
The counter virtue being meditated upon and practiced is humility. Humility is practiced by meditating on visible speech, wondrous lifelike sculptures carved into the white marble floor, demonstrating humility's antithesis to pride. Dante lists the Virgin Mary, King David, and Emperor Trajan, who exemplify that true greatness lies in serving God and serving our neighbor, not in self-adulation. We also see this specifically in the prayer of the proud at the beginning of Canto 11, when Dante witnesses the souls on this terrace praying to God, recognizing they cannot attain the peace that God provides without his help.
The beatitude here is blessed are the poor in spirit. As Dante leaves this terrace, an angel wipes the first P from his forehead, and he hears the beatitude, Beati, I'm sorry, I watch this every time,
That's okay.
Pauperis Spiritu.
Good.
This beatitude represents that spiritual poverty is the core of our humility, recognizing our need for God rather than relying on our own merit or power. It is the first beatitude because it is the foundational step for the other virtues. We cannot hunger for righteousness or be a peacemaker until we first acknowledge our own spiritual bankruptcy and total dependence on a source outside of ourselves. After the P is removed, Dante remarks that the climb has become easier because of shedding pride. He has literally become lighter, suggesting that the heaviest burden we carry is the one we place on ourselves through our ego.
As a reflection on our contemporary life, in the individual level, culture today often reveres the self-made individual, leading to the personal branding, social media, validation, and the pursuit of power for self-worth. Dante reminds us that, like the proud in Terrace 1, vainglory is a crushing burden that separates us from our authentic selfhood. We are most ourselves when we align with our divine origin.
Finally, at the interpersonal level, pride destroys connection by causing us to look down on others. The practice of humility, which is being poor in spirit, requires recognizing our shared humility rather than engaging in a culture of comparison. When we practice poverty in spirit, we stop viewing others as threats to our status. Essentially, many theologians suggest we become an overflowing cup that can receive and give love because we are no longer filled to the brim with ourselves.
I think we will all turn our mics on and applaud. Okay. Yay. Okay, good. So people, oh, that's good. Who does the yellow hands? You're in charge of the yellow hands, whoever did that. That was a bunch of different people. Good. So I'm going to say now, here's how it's going to work. That really was gorgeous. And what I'd love to do after each one is just pause for a minute or two. I'm shutting off my chat box. The chat box will be recorded by Chad and Lizette. I'll get a full copy of all the chats, all the insights you want to share. But for now, anything you want, good. I see a raised hand.
Oh,
Would
no.
somebody raise their hand if they have another thing they'd like to offer or a question for Lorna or for Alex or for anyone? Lorna put her hand down, so time for hands. Raise your yellow hand on your board if you have anything you'd like to add. I mean, there was just so much there that I loved. All right. Well, we'll go on then, but we'll probably come back to some of these things. Let's go to envy then with Annabella and Anemone. Turn your microphones on and take it away. We're into Canto 12.
So the canto that I looked at for envy was actually 15.
Good.
And
That's
then,
great.
so it's at the beginning of 15, he's seen all that, and then he's asking about it. He says, this is line 61 of Canto 15. How can a good that's shared by more possessors enable each to be more rich in it than if that good had been possessed by few? And then Virgil answers him, oh no, now I'm
So page
losing the
227,
part.
everybody, if you've got
But
Patrick, page 227, Canto 15. I think these are some of the most amazing lines in the whole Commedia. This middle section is so important. So continue, Anemone.
so he says to me, but if you still persist in letting your mind fix on earthly things, then even from true light you gather darkness. And going down, it says, when there are more souls above who love, there's more to love well there, and they love more, and mirror like each soul reflects the other. So when I read this the first time, I said, okay, this is talking about God's love. But when I read it again this time, I think it could be applied to anything. Like, I chose envy because recently I bought a house 2 years ago, but around that time and since then, I was thinking, like, I'm very envious of people who got 3% mortgage rates, or I'm very envious of people who bought the last cheap houses in my parents' neighborhood. But since then, I bought a cheap house, but I've been fixing it up for 2 years. And during that time, I've been living with my parents. And I have learned that just because I don't have something that I can call mine and I'm living there, that doesn't mean I am shut out from that. Like, I'm living with my family and I'm part of that community. Um, and today I was talking to one of my friends who just bought a house with her husband, and I talked with her a few months ago when they were buying it, and she was like, I feel like I'm going to be judged by people at my church because they think it's too big a house for us, and what are we going to do with that? And then today she told me they're getting another roommate, and this girl's gonna come live in their finished basement. And she was talking about how excited she is to like be able to add to the community in that way, and how excited she is to have this girl come stay with them. And so I think even even if this is primarily talking about God's love, it can spill over into everything, like even houses, which I before thought of as very like it's something you own, it's an investment, whatever, but really it's a place to build community. So
Beautiful. Thanks, Anemone. Annabella?
Yeah. So in Canto 13, the sin being purged is envy, which has to do with sight and the self in relation to others. We see on page 217, line 58, that the souls are leaning on each other and wearing hair shirts, which were garments normally worn by penitents or ascetics, made of coarse animal hair, sometimes even bits of metal, intended to rub and scratch the wearer. Lines 70 to 72 read, for all their eyelids pierced by iron wires were sewn up like an untamed sparrowhawk's, when restively it won't keep calm and still. So this punishment comes from the practice of falconry. By blinding these souls and having them lean on each other, they are physically experiencing the perversion of sight and dependence they demonstrated when they were envious on earth. So the counter virtue here is caritas. There are voices of love literally flying around, echoing famous biblical and literary moments of love. And as we can see in the notes on page 55, the sealing of a sparrowhawk's eyes was intended to tame the bird and make it dependent on its master. But there's an important distinction here that better illustrates for me the purpose of purgatory in general, I think. And I just want to end on this. Kirkpatrick writes beautifully, again on page 555, that the hunting bird is inherently noble, and its nobility is only enhanced when it participates in sport with its master. Properly disciplined, the sparrowhawk is all the freer to fly in pursuit of appropriate goods.
Have you written bird poetry?
I have.
There's so much of it in Dante. You'll see it again, and it's a beautiful gloss. Let's take the pause. Okay, I know you're writing good things in the comments and all that, but if this would be the virtue of fortitude, if somebody would be courageous enough to raise their hand and perhaps add something to what Annabella and Anemone have said, perhaps relating even pride and envy, or just some detail that they thought is well worth pointing out. Yay, Catherine.
I can't resist bringing up. I think I first found this poem in your Great Books class. That poem, "Who the Meek Are Not" by Mary Karr. Do you know that poem, Paul?
Yes, because years ago, and John was at that interview. Yes, I remember I interviewed her. Yeah.
Yeah, so it was just this meditation on meekness, and it reminded me of this falconry image that you shared. I wish I had the poem memorized. I actually read it at my brother's wedding because it reminds me so much of his wife. But it is this submission to the poem describes this like wild horse in a pasture that is galloping around and then comes to the line is a stunned but instant halt with its ears pricked forward awaiting the next command from his master. And that is so resonant with this falconry image that you have, that there's this like innately dignified noble creature. And falconry is this like terrifying, awesome, amazing, like very aristocratic sport, especially in the Middle Ages. And to see something that had this esteem, like that it is worthy of esteem because of the extraordinary obedience of this magnificent creature who has the power to like kill and destroy its master, that these birds of prey are terrifying, and yet like this perfect submission is what makes the falcon so magnificent. And that's like, because this comment in the chat about pursuit of excellence is a high risk for pride, desire. Adam Marshall just put this in the comment. I think that's a really delicate balance, because the falcon is excellent in this image, but only because of his humility. And it's that paradoxical kind of a very Paul Contino descend so that you may ascend kind of image. Yes.
Well, of course, it was St. Augustine well before it was me. But yeah, that's it. I mean, yeah. And what's so interesting in 13, when we meet, it's actually when we meet Sapia. She's from Siena. And on page 219, she's so envious of her fellow Sienese, she wants them to lose the battle. And she prays that they'll lose the battle. But then she is so utterly, excessively proud that she says to God, I'll fear you nevermore. And there's a bird imagery, just like the blackbird in a sunny spell. Now, I'm not sure what that quite refers to, but now she's learning by leaning on her neighbor not to think it's a zero-sum game. If you lose, I win, we both win. And that's why those lines that Anemone read, where spiritual goods increase. I mean, I don't know what you're experiencing, but already the fact that 4 people have taught this class, if you will, this reading group, I feel like the spiritual good of the whole has increased because of that. And that makes a difference. Adam, please come on in.
Yeah, I was noticing the same thing you just referred to, Canto 13, line about 109, where it's Sapia, I was called, and I witnessed other people's harm, felt joy far more than any my own good luck. Sounds very twisted, but not entirely unfamiliar. Schadenfreude, I guess.
That's it. You all know that Schadenfreude thing. You're actually happy when somebody messes up, Anemone got a lower rate than you, and that gives you perverse joy, I mean, you got a higher rate, you're doing lower, so you're taking joy in her loss. But we recognize this thing. Thank you. That's really helpful. Others on envy? Well, what did he call this latest venture in Iran? Fist of Epic Fury or some crazy thing? Okay, I'm sorry, I couldn't help myself. Please don't drop out of the group if I get a little bit editorial. We're now talking about wrath, and we move to Kim and John, roughly the end of 15 to the middle of 17. Take it away, Kim and John. Just raise your hands and put your mics on.
Yes, hi everyone. I am going to start us off with talking about my favorite terrace, which is Terrace 3. And in this terrace, we start off with Dante and Virgil entering to the sound of beings singing Beate Misericordia, which is Blessed are the merciful. And this terrace, with its thick, acrid darkness, is where irrational, wrathful penitents witness visions depicting merciful, peaceful actions inspired by true love. How wonderful it is for people to see visions of how to behave, the right way to behave. It's almost like we're, taking an instructional course on great.
Yeah.
It's fabulous. So Dante introduces us to the concept of free will in these three cantos through his character Marco of Lombard, this is just such powerful stuff. Although Marco places the ills of the world squarely on human actions, through God's gift to us of free will, it is possible for individuals to be merciful, to choose to be led by love and not wrath. Dante reminds us that we have agency, that we can change our behavior, turning our backs on spiteful rage and lean on love to guide us to be merciful and engender peace. And at the end of the visit to Terrace 3, when Dante has the third P removed from his forehead, Virgil and he hear the chorus of Beate Pacifici, or Blessed are the peaceful.
Makers.
And what resonates with me on this is that, you can have big wrath, you can have little wrath. We kind of can walk around with this stuff a lot. And, I'm leaning into this a lot. And I think one test for me, and I'm going to look to my son, Alec, to help me with this, is that I'm a big baseball fan, San Francisco Giants. So if I can go to a Giants game against the Dodgers and be okay, then I will know that I have been reformed. And if not, I know my son can say to me, Tranquilo, mama. So anyway.
Is this Alex smiling here at his mom, looking out into the distance in the horizon?
Yes.
It's amazing how wrathful sports competition can make one.
Yes.
If only wars could be fought out on the football field, right?
Yes. I think that would be a good solution. So
speaking of wars, I have to just add, Kimberly, that discourse by Marco is so important, and it's everything you said it is. We have the choice to be merciful individually. However, in line 94, this is on page 233, Dante himself gets political and gets prophetic. Law is needed to apply this break. A king is needed with the skill to see the towers of the true city at the least. The laws are there. Who sets his hand to these? There's no one. And he's talking about both church and state leadership there, as we might put it. But enough said. John?
Yeah, if you cut my arm, I bleed orange and black.
Yay.
Thank you, Kim. Here's my own read of Canto 16. Dante has serious anger issues.
He does, so you're right. Totally.
I mean, just recall whenever he kicked the frozen traitor Baca in the head and he tore out, tufts of his hair. Dante became so angry, he can't see straight. No darkness in the Inferno is as blinding as the smoke on the third terrace of Purgatorio.
Right, it says that.
this rage creates darkness. I mean, anger becomes a kind of blindness. And here's the twist. In hell, in purgatory, I mean, in the inferno, Dante sees too clearly. He judges, he condemns, he even enjoys it. But in purgatorio, Dante has to learn how to see all over again. Marco Lombardo diagnoses the problem on line 66. The world is blind, and yes, that's where you're from. That's on page 233.
Yeah.
Dante might want to blame the stars, but
yeah, you know what
the
he's
problem
doing there,
isn't
right?
the stars.
Yeah.
It's
What is
Dante.
the Shakespeare line? Right. Yeah.
Right.
The fault is not in our stars. Right. Yeah.
But it's in us. And to get personal, the problem is us. It's not the stars. And so the real question I think that Dante's trying to get at for us is, if anger blinds us, how does God teach us how to see again?
Yeah, no, it's good, man. And the thing is, I got political, and when I watch the news, I get mad, and then I fall right into wrath, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if that happens to any of you guys, but I'm all like, well, anyway. No, that's super helpful. Okay, now we take the pause that refreshes, and we think, is there any other thing we want to point to in these cantos on wrath, or questions we want to ask, perhaps Kim and John?
I guess I have a question when it comes to the emotional side of wrath and God's justice, because if I'm being honest, I'm just having a really hard time with my faith and just pre-processing. I even worked for a church for a while, and I was a youth
Yeah,
group leader and
yeah,
camp leader. I spoke at schools about Christianity, and then I started to get to know Christians more, and it made me hate Christianity. So I'm just on like a deep dive right now
yeah,
about
yeah.
what I believe and what's going on.
Well,
And
don't
so
give up
talk,
because of some nuts that you meet.
well, it's me too. It's all of us,
We're all
right?
nuts. That's
So,
true.
yeah. I'm the biggest one for sure, and I'd be the first to admit that. I'm not afraid of that. And so when it comes to wrath, I guess just like when Jesus walked into the temple, he clearly got upset, right? He flipped a
Yeah,
table. There's 100% justice there. If I walk into a hostel and see my sister standing there, I'm flipping a table, right? If I see my sister in a hostel in church, I'm flipping the table. So if in that sense, how do you balance
yeah.
wrath but justice and not, but then the
No,
verse not sinning out of anger, because I think it's, because you're right. I think the root of that can be pride, but I think the root of that can also be part of how God created us in
good.
His
No, that's
intentional
super.
design
The
of
virtue of
I don't like
justice
that.
is that, Megan. Excellent. Wrath is motivated. See what Virgil says in Canto 17 is all of our actions, good or bad, are motivated by love. And if you love justice, and you see Putin bombing the heck out of Ukraine, in justice you're angry, or whatever it is that you're seeing. So how does one discern righteous indignation in the name of justice from destructive wrath? Be it
Paul?
in a church? Yeah, please, Colleen.
Yeah, it's Kim. I was
Oh, it's
just,
Kim. Okay.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it's really hard because I think, you can struggle with this because it's like, if I'm angry, oh my gosh, that's wrong. And I think it really gets to how you manage your anger, right? Anger is
Yeah.
okay. It's okay. But let's not, become irrational with it. It's just like, it's sort of like Rumi, this guest house. You let it come in and you let it, you go out, you let it sweep through you, and you don't, lose your dignity. You don't lose your head over it. And so
Good.
yeah. So I know I
That's
wrestle with
super
this too.
helpful. And I'm glad you quoted Rumi. We're getting into religious. I'm going to go to Suzanne, but first, there's a psychiatrist in the house. Brian, is that good psychiatric advice? Let it rush through you. So be aware of it. Don't repress it. But then, like, what do we do with it?
Yeah, I mean, that sounds a lot like some of the mindfulness principles that we apply in psychotherapy. So there's the rush of emotion, and then there's the kind of almost taking a step back, like taking a moment to think about it from an observer's perspective. You can be a lot more objective and more strategic in how you respond to it with kind of that mindfulness practice. And there's a lot of ways that work for different people that can work to kind of ground to when you're having that initial surge of emotion, be it breathing techniques or any number of things that we could talk about.
Okay, Suzanne and then Michelle, and those are going to be the end. I saw Michelle made a really good compass. Suzanne first.
I was going to kind of layer on what Brian had just said. Have a curiosity about that feeling of anger. Like, what is at the core of that anger?
Yeah.
Yet, one of the best pieces of advice I've ever received, pastoral advice, was always yield to mercy. So it's justice and mercy.
Yeah. In fact, he says it in Purgatorio. I look when Peter gets the two keys, always err on the side of mercy. Yeah, in the confessional. Thank you. Now, Suzanne, is it Michelle? Michelle just raised a really good question in the chat. Could you articulate it? Because this is going to relate to Beatrice later. Where are you, Michelle?
I'm here. Can you see me?
Yeah.
Well, I was just saying, first of all, Megan, thank you for such a vulnerable question. That was really lovely.
Yeah.
And I think the group appreciates it. But I also think we have to acknowledge, like in systems we're socialized as women in particular, that anger is something to avoid, to be kind, good Christians. In a lot of churches, like that's our role. So I think like we need to acknowledge like it's okay to be angry. We can embrace that fire and anger and start to make conscious decisions about how to channel that into positive action and good. Like it's okay to feel that way. We don't have to, not everything has to be like rainbows and sunshine.
That's great. And when we hear Catherine read Beatrice, she's going to be angry. She's not happy with little Dante.
I can't wait. Catherine's going to be great. I'm excited.
She's Admiral Beatrice. All right, this was fabulous. This is just the kind of thing I hope happens when we talk about, well, it's not sloth, it's acedia. And Pierce and Jack are going to help us understand this. So put your hand thing on so you pop to the top and put your mics on and dig in.
Excellent. I will start. I will also disclaim that we are on vacation and none of our kids are asleep. So who knows what you might see or might happen in the next 3 minutes.
Hey, there they are.
Yeah, there you go.
Good.
All right. So Canto 17, the sin being purged here, as was already mentioned, is acedia, sloth. Virgil defines it very neatly in line 85 of Canto 17, the love of good when this falls short of what it ought to be. And he goes on further to describe it as the oar that wrongly slackens, which I think is a great sort of visual image of acedia. I picked this sin and Terrace in particular kind of for three reasons. The first, like we've already talked about tonight already, is like love being the central theme of the comedy and kind of the animating force that's drawing Dante upwards on this journey, and what's being sort of sanctified in him throughout it. It draws a really stark contrast for me into like if there is a sin that is about a lack of love, then there must be something sort of exceedingly important about it. And I think because it maybe seems lesser than wrath or pride or envy, some of the things that we've already been talking about tonight, it makes it a little bit more insidious. It's something that's like easy to fall into and more natural almost. The other part of that, the sort of second part of this that I think becomes adds to it and becomes interesting is in 17 in particular, Virgil talking, and I think and Catherine can correct me, Dr. Contino can correct me if I'm wrong, but it feels like 17 and 18 and the Terrace with Sloth, Terrace 4 is like this sort of like in between point of
Yes.
the sins that are being purged before and the sins that are being purged after. Um, and so he spends this time sort of extrapolating on misdirected loves and in particular misdirected intellectual love as the cause of the sins that came before, so anger, pride, and envy. And the way he talks about sort of, he says, love is the seed of all good powers, and penalties too, and penalties too that your deeds deserve. And these misdirected loves are all confusedly conceiving a good. That's what Virgil says on line 128. They're all confusedly conceiving a good for our hearts to find their rest in, which is obviously directly out of Augustine. Um, and so if all of these other sins, especially the first three that we talked about, maybe are uh, confusedly conceiving a good, and acedia is about sort of a lack of love, like what, then what is the sort of good that it's conceiving of? And I think that can only be a sort of a lack of conflict, a lack of challenge, a
Yes.
lack of striving.
Yeah.
And
Comfort. I mean,
comfort.
you
That's
just
it.
want security. Yeah.
Yeah, security and comfort. And that is I think just personally to me, very attractive.
Yeah.
I love for things to be easy. Having things be easy is great. Um, uh, and that then makes it just such an easy thing to fall into. And then I think in particular with culture and where it is right now, like there is also this sense of like the answer to all our problems is getting rid of work, is getting rid of comfort, is making everything, or not getting rid, sorry, getting rid of
Yeah.
work and finding
Yeah.
comfort. Making everything as easy as it can be, whether that's, AI or sort of social media and blunting experience, like all of those things are about ease. Um, and so that is what like sort of drew me here. And I think, the purging of this sin that you really see in 18. I love the way like it's essentially everyone is just sprinting, like they're running track.
Yeah.
And they're like they're encouraging each other with examples. And interestingly, like one is Caesar, one is Mary. And so like the just this idea of sort of pursuing with a whole heart is the purging aspect, and it manifests itself through running.
Beautiful. Before we leave this terrace, I'm going to come back to the lovely things going on in the background, including Bonnie. Hello, Bonnie, who's taking care of the kids there. But first we go to Jack. Hello, Bonnie. Jack. Hello.
So I prepared a short reflection on, I think, how we kind of see the vice of sloth in our modern society. I think sloth is one of the most misunderstood vices of today, because a lot of people understand this to mean simply just kind of a laziness, and it's definitely part of it. Um, Dante understands the slothful as those who recognized the good, but succumbed to, quote, the negligence and delay that marred your will to do good. That's from Canto 18, line 107 in my edition. The fathers of the Egyptian desert were very attentive to this vice. They called it the demon of noonday, drawing on Psalm 90, which plagues the monk during the middle of the day. The sun rises high, and the monk becomes bored with his work, peeking out the window of his cell to keep an eye on the sun to see how much longer until sundown. He's distracted, unfocused on prayer, and unfocused on the task in front of him. I think this demon plagues our time via the internet and our phones. These devices and the constant connection constantly distract us, pulling us away from the task or the person in front of us. We all know the experience of sitting at our desk, trying to get work done mid-afternoon and checking on our phone, waiting for the clock to tick. We all know the uneasiness we feel in trying to attend to the person in front of us, but the itch to pull our phones from our pockets is strong. As Dante understands, It is not that we fail to recognize the goodness of the task or the person in front of us, but it's that we fail to attend to those things with sufficient diligence and love. So
beautiful. That's beautiful, Jack. Yeah. And the thing I wanted to add, and this pertains to the background of Pierce's situation with the little ones, I was looking at this book I'd recommended, Glittering Vices, and we're not monks in this group, right? Most of us, or many of us, are married, and what she does is relate this lack of care, this acedia, to marriage, which I thought was very helpful. That is, when one finds oneself becoming just taking for granted one's spouse and kind of indifferent to the small things that one can do in married life that you can start taking for granted. Let's see. Well, I'll let you dive into her book, but I'll pause there. That's something I've been thinking about. Mary and I have been married 34 years. Some of you have been married longer, far longer. I think, John, you celebrated your 50th, didn't you, like a while ago? It takes not a lack of zeal, not a lack of love, but, making that attentive, zealous effort. So let me pause here and see if we can get either some testimony, some questions, or another observation about Dante's text.
I can't find the hand motion.
Yeah.
But, I love what you said, Pierce, about ease. I think about that all the time. And I think about something that a friend said to me that I felt like was like the greatest definition. It was like one of the best compliments. She's like, there's nothing that you hate more than convenience. Because I came to realize I do everything in sort of the most complicated way that there is to do most of the time, because it is like the way of finding joy is to do something all the way. And when I do something in the convenient way of, finding convenience, I just find that convenience is the destroyer of joy, because joy comes from effort. And when I had children, I realized that one of the main ways that love grows for children, the reason parents have such incredible deep love for their children is because they must care for them completely from a point of complete helplessness. And it is that act of service to them that builds that love between them, and that love between people comes from helping one another. And so effort in every direction is ways of building love and building joy and building connection. And wherever we take that away, wherever we remove effort, we're removing joy and love and connection. So that was what I thought of as you were describing that. Here's.
And as you said that, I was thinking of, many of you know the flow state, Csikszentmihalyi flow, that concept. You got to have the hard part of the task to get into the joy of flow, where you forget about time and you're just into it. That doesn't happen. Now, there's a place for sacred leisure. Would you agree, Colleen, that Pierce?
I love leisure too. I'm very big on leisure, and but sort of creating it that when you earn it, then it brings you joy.
Yeah.
What is the Shakespeare of all days were holidays? I can't remember that whole quote, but to play would be as tedious as to work. We have to work. I mean, we're all here doing this, not necessarily easy thing for the joy of
No, you're right.
Together.
You're right. No, and two things come to mind. That's how my friend John Ruff always would have. I was his colleague for 12 years. There was always a sense of play about the hard work he did. And today during lunch, I did take leisure, and on my iPhone, sorry, Jack, yes, I just wanted to realize, I watched the Paul McCartney Man on the Run documentary, which is on Prime, which I recommend. And these songs they bring back such good memories. And his brother says, oh, he's a workaholic. He goes, I'm not working. I'm a playaholic. It's play, it becomes play, and that's kind of the flow state too. Anyway, let's stop rambling. Let's continue up the mountain, and this is fabulous. And now we're getting to the excessive love of things, avarice, gluttony, and lust. And who are our presenters? Well, it's Colleen herself and Luke. Take it away. Raise your hands and put your mics on.
Let me find my hand. Let's see. There it is. Okay. So I'm going to draw a connection here that stood out to me. I'm going to be on, let's see, Canto 19, lines 118 is where I'm starting. This is on 249, page 249 in the Kirkpatrick. And this is Hadrian V. He says, because our eyes were fixed on earthly things, at no point raised to look towards the heights, so justice sinks them here within the earth. Since avarice extinguished all our love for any good, and so good works were lost, justice here holds us tight within its grip. And so I was struck by the way that avarice, in causing our hearts to be overly focused on earthly things, extinguishes our love for anything truly good. And so this reminded me of the parable of the sower that Jesus tells, and specifically the seed that falls among the thorns. And so I'm going to read those two verses specifically. And this is from Matthew 13, verses 7 and 22. Other seeds fell among thorns, and the thorns grew up and choked them. And then when he's explaining it later to his disciples, he says, as for what was sown among thorns, this is the one who hears the word, but the cares of the world and the deceitfulness of riches choke the word, and it proves unfruitful. And so it's this idea that the excessive love of earthly things extinguishes your ability to love the things that are truly good, and the distractions of the world can blind you to what's truly important.
Thank you. Thank you. Colleen.
Okay, so I sort of meditated on the passage that you mentioned at the beginning, Paul, on Canto 21, page 257, at the bottom of the page 58, where describing stages talking about the earthquake. Tremors strike here when any soul feels pure and rises newly cleansed to start its climb. And that cry follows as the soul ascends. The will alone gives proof of purity. When wholly free to change its sacred place, it aids and sweeps the soul up, willing well. The soul till then indeed had willed assent, but set against that will there is the bent, which God instills for pain as sin's equivalent. And I, who've lain 500 years and more in that same pain, have only felt just now the freedom of the better way ahead. And this doesn't specifically speak to greed and avarice, but it like really struck me as the idea of God is always ready for us to turn towards God, towards love, towards light. We're not in purgatory because God's placed us there. We're in purgatory because we are not ready to ascend, and that we get that the knowledge of knowing when you can ascend and when you have purged the sin from your soul and you are ready to move either all the way or even just to the next step, you're ready to rise from the earth and see God's light, is our choice entirely. And that we are in control of it. We know, that we really know when and then it sort of relates to when we are. There's another great line in Canto 23, line 124. Ascending here and circling all around this mount that straightens what the world distorts. So it's like in purgatory, we are able to, get away from all of the distortions, which greed, I sort of took it to be like a collective. It's a personal sin, but it's also a collective sin because it is the way that it's fed by society. Those who have the avaricious who are holding and hoarding wealth, need the rest of us to strive for materials things in order to protect and continue to feed their wealth and their power. And so it's like a symbiotic thing where we're all striving and re-feeding each other's need for earthly possessions, and that distorts our view of who we are and what we want and our ability to turn toward the light. And when you get to purgatory, you're able to undo those distortions and focus on what you actually need to do to repent and to atone, and the amount of time and the amount of effort that takes. And then you get to decide yourself, you get to feel that you are ready to move forward. And I don't know, it made me feel just like really excited and like light to think about that.
That's great. Let's take our pause and see if any yellow hands go up or voices emerge in response. Yeah, amen, John. The curious thing about Statius, he's not been greedy. Dante says, I don't see you as an avaricious guy. He goes, no, I was prodigal. I spent willy-nilly, you know. And it's an interesting thing. Even in the Inferno, the avaricious and the prodigal are jostling against each other. And of course, the image that they reflect upon is Mary giving birth in a manger. It occurs to me as we go to gluttony, I understand that Ty is going to be talking about the body-soul connection, and then to lust. We do have bodies. We're bodies and souls. Dante's always reminding us. It's been an hour. Should we get up and stretch for a minute? Perhaps do a dance or just anything you want to do. I'm going to get up and stretch. My leg was starting to get. Yeah, there you go. That's the ticket. All right. I just think it might be a good idea. And of course, if you have to get up and get a glass of water or something, do so. But yes, yes. Hi there, Alicia.
I had a question about maybe a help distinguish between the terraces of envy and covetousness, because I think a lot of times those things kind of are seen as similar or hand in hand. And so I was just wondering maybe if anybody had a definition or distinction between those two. I think there is one. I think it's made clear that there is one. Maybe one is more worldly, has to do with power versus just individual wants and needs. But I was just wondering if anybody had a.
Well, I'll take a first stab, because with avarice, it's stuff. Like, look behind you. I do like books. You know, the compulsion to get another book. You know, okay, resist. Okay, little temperance here would be good. Envy is well, there's only a limited amount of goods, be they material or even more importantly, spiritual. Like, let's say regard. Somebody's lauded. I'm ignored. I'm envious. Or somebody loses something and I show a good show of sympathy, but really I'm thinking, well, I'm glad I'm not like that, you know, and it's a more perverse. There's a sense in which those first three are especially perverse because they're self-love turned inward, you know. I want justice and I want it my way. There's wrath and I lash out. Pride, excellence becomes superiority and contempt for others, you know. So in that way, it's more like I want stuff, I think, avarice. And what's interesting about Pope Hadrian, you know, those guys, you know, clearly liked stuff, you know, but Dante goes down because he respects the papacy and he's going to kneel down before him. He goes, get up. There's no hierarchy here, you know, don't kiss my ring or anything like that. I don't know, does that help? Or maybe somebody else has something else they'd like to talk about with avarice and envy and the connection that Alicia's seeing. Anyone else? I do think they're related. I mean, what did Anemone point to is, you know, who's got the better mortgage rate? Who's got the bigger house? I mean, we do that, right? Okay, let's go then to gluttony, shall we? So raise your hand, gluttony team. I think it's Ty and Megan, and Am I right in thinking that Megan's going to go first?
Yes.
I thought so.
And actually, when you recommended that I get up and get a drink of water, I grabbed a LaCroix that actually is going to tie in with my point.
Perfectly great. I love visual aids too.
Okay, so I feel like gluttony, which centers on food and drink, is especially relevant in today's society because everything that you see in the store is packaged to look as visually appealing, tempting, and even be chemically altered to be as addictive as possible. So much research goes into fine-tuning every piece of food that you consume to looking and tasting as appealing as humanly possible, which I think is really interesting in light of what we're reading here. The hymn that this group of sinners is singing is Libia Mia, which is quoting Psalm 51:15. O Lord, open thou my lips, and my mouth shall shew forth thy praise. So you see this throng of spirits, silent and devout. This is kind of referring to page 265. Who are dark and hollow round the eyes, pallid in feature, and so gaunt and waste their skin was formed to show the very bone. So they are starving, they are wasting away. They have not had any food for a very, very, very long time, perhaps going on to hundreds of years for many of them. And I think the thing that just really stuck with me as I was reading this, they still feel the hunger and they still feel the thirst, and they're still tempted by the beautiful fruit trees that they're kind of walking past. So when you jump to page 272, Canto 24, line 103, I saw a group that raised their hands and called towards the leaves. I don't know what, like silly, overeager little tots who plead, although their target won't respond, but rather seeks to whet their appetite, dangling unhidden what they want aloft. So the tree is like torturing them. So you get this image of torture, and yet this is not something that is received as just pointless suffering. This is actually something that kind of is sanctifying them and making them whole. So I know we touched on this a little bit in the last class, but I do think one of the most beautiful pieces is in Canto 23, starting at line 64, which is on page 267.
Read the whole thing, Megan. Read that whole passage. It's so beautiful.
And all these people weeping as they sing, because their gollets led them past all norms, are here remade as holy, thirsting, hungering. Cravings to eat and drink are fired in us by perfumes that fruit, and from the spray that spreads and fans above the greenery. Nor once alone, encircling round the space, is agony and pain refreshed in us. I call it pain. Rightly, I should say solace, for that same yearning leads us to the tree that led Christ in his joy to say, Eli, when through his open veins he made us free. So I think that very much speaks for itself, where they're going from hungering and thirsting for food, which doesn't really provide any kind of long-term joy, into something greater, which is the word of God and grace and truth and beauty and all of these other things that are ultimately more sustaining. So I think that's just an absolutely beautiful passage.
Yeah, well, that's a beautiful analysis. Thank you. Ty is going to, I think, bring us into a more specific, interesting piece of this. Please.
Yeah, and this is one of those things where I just did not ever think about this, and I wasn't familiar enough with Aristotle and his understanding of conception that when I hit this, I just was like, holy smokes. I had no idea that this was a thing. So in answer to Dante's question about souls appearing emaciated, which is kind of an interesting thing, Statius begins by explaining conception on the way to the lust level of purgatory. They're going up this staircase, I guess one by one, because it's a thin staircase. But Statius explains the idea of perfected blood He explained that the male's blood undergoes a refinement process in the heart, gaining what is called a formative virtue. And again, I guess this is based off Aristotle. I didn't know I had so much power in the
Yeah, right.
conception of my children.
Okay, we're getting into funny territory here. We got to take this with a little sense of humor. Friends, we're on page 275. And there's going to be all kinds of problematic things that emerge from this, but keep going. You're on a roll.
Indeed. All right. So when this active blood meets the passive blood, which is apparently menstrual blood, of the mother, it begins to organize the matter into a living organism. So again, men really were the creators, according to, until I guess probably what, the 1800s.
I don't know the history. I'm afraid if there's a biologist
Kindy
in the room,
and my wife and I were talking about this earlier, and we did a bit of I guess in 1827, the human egg was discovered. So I don't know what again, I'm not a biologist, but I just found this interesting. So what the three stages were: the vegetative stage, the embryo developing basic life, similar to a plant. And then the sensitive stage, being that the embryo develops senses and movements like an animal. And then God intervening directly, kind of the intellective state, breathing in the individual soul, which draws into its own substance the previous stages. So I found this to be super fascinating. And then kind of getting to how the shade body works. Dante through Statius explains that the soul doesn't lose its formative power when the physical body dies. Instead, once it reaches the shores of the afterlife, it kind of imprints its shape onto the surrounding moist air, thus creating a shade that looks exactly like the person's former self, allowing the souls to see, speak, or even feel pain or joy despite lacking physical flesh. I just found that to be so fascinating and something that I just have never heard of. And again, that just could be a big empty spot in my education, but I'm always delighted to learn new things.
Me too. And just to add to that, I mean, did you have the Kirkpatrick translation?
Yes, and his notes are extensive.
Yeah. The best notes I ever read on this thing, and I've been teaching it a long time. I mean, he separates Dante from Averroes, the Muslim Aristotelian, who said, the soul just goes away from the body and becomes part of this oversoul or something. For Dante, I mean, to me, it's an incarnational affirmation, body and soul together. What you do with your body matters, and the soul is the form of the body. And if there are any Aristotelians in the room, we won't take your science, right? We've developed since then, but maybe some things you may wish to add here, perhaps anything, any thought. John has something. John.
So I have a question. So, going back to the gluttony thing, these gluttonous souls are needing to learn restraint. They're going to need to learn, not to be gluttonous anymore. Throughout the Purgatorio, these souls are undergoing all kinds of changes to become, purified. Why are souls frozen in the Inferno?
Yeah, this came up. Remember our first time. This is our third time, but the first time this came up, we found that quote in the Brunetto Latini passage about, remember, Catherine, remember this? Like, they can't. You said that they can change. They're in hell. Like, okay, can you just be your Aristotelian brilliant self and tell us, why can't a soul change in hell? Why can't a soul like Francesca say, this is really stupid, actually, this spinning around business? Maybe we did do something dumb. Why?
Because the freedom has been lost. They've surrendered their freedom. It's not available for them. It's no longer within their nature they're no longer capable of making a free choice based on like who they have ontologically become at that stage.
Let me ask the psychiatrist, Brian, can human beings, like in this world, in this life, get to a point where they're incapable of making free choices anymore?
You can have interesting questions of capacity lining up with a disease state, but I would not feel comfortable saying that I mean, it would feel tantamount to giving up on someone, which
Yes.
to me would be contrary to like the work that we do.
Okay, Alex Prager has a contribution. Alex, put your mic on and say something. Oh, yeah, and then Pierce is going to quote C.S. Lewis, who I think is the cat's meow. So let's go to Alex first, please.
Yeah, sure. I was just um, wondering about because some of the punishments that we see in the Purgatorio seem to somewhat resemble some of the things that we saw in Inferno. And so I was kind of wondering then maybe if it, it's not in the punishments or what's happening to the souls, then maybe it has to be a difference in the souls themselves.
Yes, that we would establish. That's Catherine's point, that the soul is no longer able to be free, to make that free choice. Now, Pierce is going to quote C.S. Lewis, and sometimes he's the icing on the cake. What do you got?
I just pulled from Great Divorce, and he says there are only two kinds of people in the world, or in the end, sorry, those who say to God, "Thy will be done," and those to whom God says in the end, "Thy will be done." All that are in hell choose it. Without that self-choice, there could be no hell. And so that it's similar to what Catherine was saying before, that there is it is actually about like free will and independence, and that God has let them do this to themselves. And so it is not a like God imposing a lack of choice on them. It is actually like an active choice that they have already made that has settled them where they are. And I think that's the thing that like we get all bent out of shape, and rightly so, that like, oh, they can't get out of hell. They can't, it's not, they have chosen that already. And I think that's the most sort of salient part.
So let me push back on this because I was just thinking, I deal with people that are drug addicted, homeless. And
yes.
And I just think if a person is in the grip of addiction, they don't have much free will left. I mean, but there's a spark there that you're always trying to hope that this soul, that's in this incarnated soul that's standing right before me, can make a change. And by God, they do make changes. People do change. And I just don't. I think there's some other things going on with hell or the inferno why people can't change. I think there's an anthropology there that I'm very, very suspicious of.
Mhm. Well, I think it's really critical to remember that everybody in purgatory is saved. They all
Right.
have salvation already. And some of them, like there's bad people in purgatory who have done terrible things in history and in mythology, and they were either baptized or someone prayed for them, or like they've just like slid in for some reason. And some of them have to go through these tormentous like phases to become eligible, to become suitable to be in heaven. But that is not available to the people in hell because ultimately what they have done is rejected Jesus. And so they don't get to go to heaven or think about salvation or potentially choose salvation because they have made a decision to reject the salvation offered by Jesus Christ, and almost nothing else matters. Like we didn't really in this group like spend much time in the very, very first moments of hell, where it's you have people who just kind of didn't really make a decision. And the way that they're punished, there's all these insects on the ground. Everyone's like knee deep in insects. And there's guys on horses that are carrying flags around and they're just running around, and people like crowds follow after this flag and then they follow after this flag, and it's like they can't choose. Those people, by not choosing, rejected the salvation offered through Jesus, and so they're in this like chaos forever basically, but didn't really do anything bad. They just didn't accept salvation, and that is the dividing line between hell and purgatory.
I think there's a nasty specter of St. Augustine and predestination that feeds into all of this. And
by the way, John has posted, all of you guys should friend John on Facebook, and you could read the recurring posts that he's been putting there on Facebook in response to our conversations. Just explain that a little bit more, John.
Well, just that, and we're going to especially see this in Paradiso, where Trajan makes it into the paradise. I can't think of the guy's name who's
It's
the
Ripheus.
Trojan.
It's Ripheus, and Ripheus, and then Cato, of course, is the guardian of purgatory. Okay, we got three pagans. Ripheus is some Trojan from 2,000 years before Christ. He's in the eye of the eagle, and it blows Dante's mind that he's there. To me, John, this is a hopeful move where Dante is approaching, and forgive me here, Dostoevsky, who has a conception of hell in which God still calls those in hell. He acknowledges that people are still cursing God and saying, I want no part of your mercy, but he's still calling them. Why would God do that? This is what happens to Ripheus. Ripheus somehow, mysteriously, is saved. This, it seems to me, perhaps sentimentally, perhaps truly, a warrant for Virgil's salvation. I'm not alone in that. Others have argued this, that implicitly Dante is saying hell may have a loophole somewhere.
Yeah, of all people that can't change, Virgil can't change. I mean, that just seems
I know, and
crazy to me.
anybody, we all fall in love with Virgil. We talked about this. Unfortunately, in the limits of time, I have to cut this short. This will never be solved. You must struggle with this now forever when you've been with Dante for a while. But I'm grateful, Ty, that you brought us into this soul-body connection, which is so important, and that beautiful exposition, Megan, that you gave us. But now we're in the circle, the terrace of lust, and my notes are lost. And identify yourselves. Who are those presenters on lust? And raise your hands and put your microphones on and bring us into the fire, please, won't you?
I think it's me and Michael.
Okay, where's Mike? Oh, there they are. Okay, Michelle and Michael, thank you.
Yeah. So I'll kick us off. Hi, everyone.
Hello.
Talking about the terrace of lust. I think I was surprised by how hopeful it felt. Now, maybe that's a theme we've been seeing in a lot of the other terraces too, but I think we're so often taught, especially in like a church context, like that lust or desire is like dirty and shameful and something that needs to be crushed and extinguished and sort of denying by the self. So I expected kind of to see that judgment here, and instead, what Dante seems to be giving us is this transformation. This really, of course, it makes sense, I guess. Maybe it's a bit self-indulgent choice by the writer as we're getting to know this fella, like knowing how deeply Dante has loved and fixated and obsessed maybe on his Beatrice and remembering his romantic writers. I think he gets here and he knows this terrace is meant for him. Like, this is his moment. If we're watching this on screen, I think we've been saying like, we're reading this and thinking like, where would I be? Like, you just know Dante got here and this was his terrace. So what's striking is that he doesn't frame lust as like an evil desire. It's just like, again, that love that's been misdirected that we've heard about. So the fire here that we see, which is gripping, doesn't feel like a punishment so much as like some sort of purification. It's very intense, but it's purposeful. So if we were watching this on screen, I would say this would be the moment that feels big and scary, right? So I'm Canto 27 is when this all kind of goes down. Like you think it's going to be so frightening, that fear you think you'd feel like asking you like cinematically to staring into the flames. This is when I love our Dante becomes an active hero. It's so epic and moving. He's like imagining it early in the canto, like bodies of human beings he's seen burn. And Virgil tells him like, here may be agony, but never death. And as anyone who's ever felt like the heartbreak of like unrequited love or just an all-consuming lust, you kind of get this moment. It would be agony to let it go, just to shift that different lens. And then he says at 35 or 36 around there, he says like, look, son, between Beatrice and you, there's just this wall. It's kind of like his now or never moment. Like this is the only way through is like through this fire. So he comes to sort of this moment where he keeps sort of reminding him, he's like, he says, there's this wall. So then around like 40, he's like, my obstinacy softening now. I turn to hear her name, which growing still thrives my thinking to my guide, so wise, saying, what's this? He shook his head. Would you prefer we stayed on this side? And then he smiles at him as though to see a child won round by apples. Like he knows that he's
Yeah.
going to go. He's going to make that choice. And so you trust, and somehow Dante knows and believes like it's, this is going to be a moment. The fire is going to burn, but it's not going to destroy, as he said. So anyway, I like that when he's going through, he's still fixing his thoughts on her. It's so deliberate and purposeful, but you feel like it's sort of a release. It's poignant in a way. And the fact that this is the final terrace before we get to sort of the Paradiso and Eden feels like such an important choice. Like, the love, this kind of love is already so close to something so beautiful. It just needs to be like oriented the right way. So before it was sort of like, I love Beatrice because like she completes me vibes, but then now it's like, I love Beatrice because through her, like I'm led to God. So
Okay. Okay, good. Well, I don't think we're quite there yet, but I think your hopeful note is so right. Just to fill it out, maybe I don't want to steal your thunder, Michael. Heterosexuals are going one way, homosexuals are going the other way, and they're embracing and they're kissing, a brief kiss. Okay, just this is how he portrays this. So, Michael, you pick it up, and what else should we know?
Yeah, so I think of Dante's framing of lust as a sort of misdirected love, meaning that it's not the underlying feeling or affection of love itself that is sinful, but it's corruption by our appetites, by our desires that ultimately leads us away from God. The proper ordering of our desires, particularly love, is necessary for the development and habituation of virtue, in this case, the virtue of chastity. This seems to be what Dante is describing through Virgil in the 27th canto, lines 130 and 131, and 139 to 140 in particular, where Virgil says this: I've drawn you here by skill in searching mind. Now take what pleases you to be your guide. And he continues, no longer look to me for signs or word. Your will is healthy, upright, free, and whole. And what Dante says here makes me think of C.S. Lewis's iconic passage in The Problem of Pain, which we've kind of touched on or alluded to several times throughout the previous sessions. But Lewis says this: I willingly believe that the damned are, in one sense, successful, rebels to the end, that the doors of hell are locked on the inside. I do not mean that the ghosts may not wish to come out of hell in the vague fashion wherein an envious man wishes to be happy, but they certainly do not will even the first preliminary stages of that self-abandonment through which alone the soul can reach any good. They enjoy forever the horrible freedom they have demanded, and are therefore self-enslaved, just as the blessed, forever submitting to obedience, become through all eternity more and more free. So it's that contrast between self-enslavement to disordered appetites on the one hand, and self-abandonment through which we can accept God's will and God's grace as the source of true freedom on the other.
Oh, thank you. That's beautiful. Now, the reason I said I think he has a ways to go is we have to get to the confrontation with the beautiful, beloved Beatrice. We may not get to paradise tonight, which is all the more reason why everybody, all 200 of you, will show up next time. But because everybody wants to go to heaven. But right now, given that contrast between hell and purgatory, I want to give 10 minutes to the doctor in the house. We probably have others. Brian, share your screen. Tell us about how this has helped you as a psychiatrist to treat people psychologically, spiritually, in the way that you do.
Absolutely. Happy to do so. Thank you so much for time and attention tonight. I'm really excited to talk with you all about this. I'm just going to get into slideshow mode here. And here we go. Can anyone confirm? Does that look okay to y'all?
Looks
All
great.
right. Fantastic. Yeah, so I'm a psychiatrist currently based in Honolulu. I do a lot of work in emergency and crisis work, especially in populations with severe mental illness. And I've completed broad training in med management, interventional psychiatry, and psychotherapy. And believe it or not, I actually tie a lot of my interest in this back to like my great books experience. I studied psych and religion during my time at Pepperdine, and I was drawn to psych as a specialty because of what I perceived as its special focus on the human narrative. So when I heard we were doing this book club, it seemed like a great opportunity to revisit Dante with fresh eyes and new experience to draw from. So I share all that to give some context for how I've been approaching it this time around. I've been focusing my attention on how we might understand Dante as expressing underlying psychological concepts and principles through the lens of his cultural background and context. Basically, I'm asking myself, what is Dante telling us about what it's like to be stuck in these psychospiritual patterns that do harm? And what's he telling us about the experience of overcoming and recovering from these patterns? So I don't want to dwell too long in Inferno. We've spent enough time there already, but I do think it's helpful for illustrating how I conceptualize Purgatorio. So, Virgil is often read as like an analog of human reason. Well, this time around, I tried reading him also as an analog of a therapist. And some of the imagery actually lends itself pretty well to this. If we read the Inferno as, say, an analog of like the dark potentials of the human mind and behavior gone wrong, then Virgil, as our stand-in for the therapist, is serving to facilitate Dante's guided exploration of the darker unconscious. So, like a skillful analyst, Virgil offers observations and interpretations to draw Dante's attention to, at times, really uncomfortable truths about the human psyche in general and himself. Like insofar as he sees himself in the shades there, like with Francesca in the Circle of Lust, for example, as depicted here. He confronts these uncomfortable realities about himself. Virgil quite literally negotiates with the defenses of hell in order to facilitate his deeper understanding of himself and human nature, going deeper into the inferno. Similar enough to how the therapist, if you will, must skillfully interpret and strategize around psychological defenses. So in the Inferno, I was asking myself in every circle, what is Dante telling us about the mental and spiritual state of a person acting in this maladaptive way? What is it about their psychology and behavior that's keeping them stuck in place? So I have to say, many of the patterns that we see in the Inferno, like struggling with insight and self-reflection, or externalizing, cursing, and blaming others, or feeling totally overwhelmed by guilt to the point that its only function is to hurt rather than serving any redemptive purpose. These are patterns that we can see all the time in people that come to us in crisis, and we work very hard to try to get them out of it. But at least with respect to Dante's own personal journey through the comedy, this deep dive into the psyche is fruitful. He comes out the other side at the base of the mountain of Purgatorio, and yeah, he finds it's a more pleasant place, maybe at times not entirely unlike why, as Paul has pointed out. But there's also a lot of hard work to be done. But having done the uncomfortable introspection of wrestling with the shadow self, at this stage of the journey, there's a very different spirit than the Inferno. The shift from Inferno to Purgatory, to me, it feels a lot like working with someone as they're shifting out of a mental state of crisis or stasis and into a space where they're actively participating in the therapeutic process of growing and maturing as a person. And I find this really beautifully symbolized in the steps into Purgatory proper. I'm just going to move my box here so I can read them. The first step was white marble. I was mirrored in it just as I appeared. The second was dark purple, darker than purple, cracked both lengthwise and across. The third, as flaming as blood spurting from a vein. Next slide. Yeah, there we go. So I interpret the steps as follows. The white step, I see the patterns of this behavior in myself. The black step, I see the damage that these patterns have been causing. And the red step, I'm ready to commit to the hard work of change. So in this purgatory state of mind, if you will, defensive externalized blame is replaced by an effective sense of responsibility and insight that's derived from honest self-reflection. Guilt and shame no longer function to bury us and keep us mired in place, but rather serve a more proper redemptive purpose of moving us towards trying to make things right and progressing towards psychological and spiritual maturity. And as I see it, we see this hard work of change in progress on each of the terraces of people coming to terms with the patterns of thought and behavior that have caused them trouble in order to grow and change. And it's certainly not so linear and binary in actual practice. Sometimes people backslide. Sometimes we go in and out of a more inferno-like versus purgatory-like state of mind. And sometimes we're just at different stages with respect to different roles or parts of ourselves. But I found it a useful enough way to help kind of conceptualize the therapeutic process using Dante as a lens. So then in Purgatory proper, similar to my approach to the Inferno, I find myself asking, what's the lived psychological experience of overcoming these behaviors like for a person undergoing this hard work of growth and change? I interpret each terrace as Dante's depicting physically what it's like for the mind and spirit to overcome these patterns that keep people stuck in place and instead organically develop the counter virtues of each terrace. And I also wondered how the process depicted on each terrace might correlate with, say, actual clinical practices. So I'm not going to go through every terrace, but just a couple examples of how I apply this interpretive lens. So for me, starting with the Terrace of Pride, some of the characteristics that you folks already wonderfully went over, it's unwillingness to submit or inappropriate self-importance or blindness to one's shortcomings and the bluster to cover that up. There's overall kind of a flavor of unhealthy narcissism to it. And I find it fitting that this is the first terrace because unhealthy narcissism is often thought of as a product of early developmental struggles. In some theories, it's associated with lacking the experience of emotional safety and empathy that would allow for the healthy integration of one's imperfections. And I'd argue that the capacity to reflect on one's narcissistic defenses and humility in order to grow is really foundational to the growth that we see on all the other terraces as we go up. So what's it like to realize that you're suffering from this kind of mental state and to try to get better? Well, I'd submit the interpretation that Dante depicts a physical metaphor for the struggle of overcoming unhealthy narcissism. The experience of seeing oneself as one is, rather than a long-standing narcissistic protective self-image, is reasonable enough to liken to a nearly unbearable crushing weight. It can trigger a severe collapse or depression so consuming of one's experience that it's extremely tempting to retreat or run back to the gate, if you will. And when they do choose to muscle on in therapy for a time, it can be very challenging. In Purgatorio, they're forced to look down at examples of pride punished, mirroring how, in the state of depressive collapse, it's much easier to self-lacerate with negative examples than to find comfort in a positive self-image. I mean, their previous positive self-image, after all, is just shattered, and building a new, authentically positive self takes time and hard work, which to me resembles the relative difficulty that shades have on the first terrace with looking up to walls to see examples to inspire them, at least at first. But the more they stick with the work, as Alex and Lorna pointed out for us, the lighter the weight becomes, and which is also fitting for the often challenging upfront therapeutic process that gets easier with time as we work with these patients. And I've also prepared a little bit of commentary on the Terrace of Gluttony. Here, Dante depicts shades working on mastering excess appetite, or in this case, experiencing intense hunger. I think it works reasonably well to substitute the fruit here for one's excess appetite of choice. I read Dante here as capturing how the psychological abstinence from an appetite on which we become dependent really can feel like a sort of starvation. And I see potential parallels with the experience of addiction, where developing practices of abstinence can be truly punishing, depending on the nature of the behavior physiologically as well as psychologically. So here I was struck by how the shades learn by observing patterns of uncontrolled appetite directly in themselves and others, and are empowered by that experience, as described in the canto. The one begged does not reply, but to sharpen their wish, holds high what they desire, and does not hide it. Then they left, as if changing their minds. As I read it, the shades on this terrace demonstrate growth when they're able to step out of the pattern of begging at the foot of the tree and join in thoughtful observation and reflection on the sideline, where, with assistance and encouragement, they ultimately gain mastery over this pattern of behavior and are able to continue on their journey. Much easier said than done, and in reality, of course, we do our best to offer whatever extra help we can. But nonetheless, kind of as I alluded to earlier, I see the shades of progress here as one example of an application of mindfulness principles, which we often invoke in psychotherapy. They learn to observe their behavior from more of an observer's point of view, taking a step back, and take a more strategic intervention. And in doing so, step away from the vicious cycle and make lasting changes in their habits. That is the end of what I've prepared here. I hope it's interesting and helpful to think about Dante from something of a psychological perspective. I found that it's been useful for me, at least. And again, really appreciate your time and attention.
Yeah. I mean, just really, that's just beautiful. I can't tell you how much don't leave the slideshow yet, because remember you put some of mine on there.
Yeah,
so leave it on. Yeah,
okay.
Really fascinating. Megan speaks for all of us. Any questions? We get free therapy from Brian for the next 2 minutes.
Can you talk a little bit more about the narcissistic self?
Yeah.
Yeah, so what I'm referring to there, yeah, how to break this down relatively quickly. So it often shows up as kind of a very fragile ego, somebody who has developed very little tolerance to tolerate like unpleasant realities about themselves. And part of that can come from like a lack of like modeling or empathy, often traced back to like parental or attachment relationships, where essentially someone doesn't develop the capacity to realize that they can fail and that is okay, or that they can be imperfect and that is okay. You have to build up this very fragile ego that I am wonderful and perfect, and any challenge to that or anything that kind of shatters that illusion is psychologically intolerable. It needs to be neutralized or ignored or buried somehow. And that reaction can be very violent and aggressive sometimes, or just very dramatic. I hope that's helpful.
Brian, thank you so much. We're gonna have 20 minutes left. I want to apologize to Dana. Dana has not only been to Florence, but she's going to play Picarda next time. But we'll probably get to that in April. We'll begin Paradiso in April. This is the earthly paradise. This beautiful picture that Brian found is Dante. If you go to the beginning of 28, there's the most beautiful description of the earthly paradise. This is Eden. And just, yeah, you'll be changing the slides for me because you're sharing the screen. Aching to search now in all around the holy forest, dense, alive, and bright, which tempered to my eyes the newborn day, not pausing any more, I left the verge, treading in slow, slow steps across the field. The earth below breathed scent on every side. A gentle breeze, unchanging in itself, struck on my forehead, yet with no more force than with the smoothest of our changing winds. To this, the branches, trembling in response, yielded, all bending to the place at which the sacred mountain casts its earliest shade. It's beautiful. He sees a stream. Next page, page 290. He sees a lady. And he looks at the lady. No, keep there in Matilda. Lady, you warm yourself, line 43, or so I think, to see your lovely looks. They usually bear witness to the heart. May you incline in will to move more close. Dante's had two dreams that are worthy of remembering. The dream of the siren is a dream of what the psychologists call projection. You see something and with your own mind you create it into something else. Matilda is not carrying a torch for Dante. He's using language that almost suggests that she does. She's happy, she's joyful, she's beautiful, she's greeting him. But Dante, when he says, you make me call to mind Proserpina, perhaps has still some work to do. And perhaps his next therapist, Beatrice, will be more like an admiral than a kindly parental figure like Virgil. We go to Canto 29. Dante calls on the muses. We have a pageant. Go to the next slide of the Bible. I showed you this at the first time. The whole array of scripture is illustrated by these people, Old Testament, New Testament. The griffin, two natures, eagle, lion, represents Christ's two natures, and Beatrice's eyes reflect the griffin. Dante sees this before him, and he is amazed. And on the very top of 300, here's where Catherine and I will come in. And I ask if you have a pen, I'd like you to mark your text because I want you to, maybe I should ask the question this way. Is Beatrice the therapist Dante needs at this point? If so, how so, or why so? Because it's like an old commercial that used to go like this. The guy's on the couch and he says, oh, I don't know. I just feel sad whenever I think of griffins. And the therapist leans over and says, you know what makes me sad? You do. And it was only lasted a couple of weeks. It probably got taken off the air. But she's very tough. And Virgil is now looking for his parent figure. She appears. Her robe was green, line 32. We're going to take it away, okay, Catherine? Her dress the color of a living flame. An eye and spirit who so long had not been, trembling in her presence, racked by awe, began again to tremble with her glance, without more evidence that eyes could bring, but darkly through the good that flowed from her, sensing the ancient power of what love was. But on the instant that it struck my sight, this power, this virtue that had pierced me through before I'd even left my boyhood state — he was 9 when he first had a crush on her — I turned aside and leftwards, meaning now with all my hope and the deference that some small child that runs when hurt or frightened to its mommy, to say to Virgil, there is not 1 gram of blood in me that does not tremble now. I recognize the signs of ancient flame. He's citing Dido in the Aeneid. He's feeling the fire of love, but Virgil was not there. Our lack alone was left where once he'd been. Virgil, dear sire, Virgil, to him I'd run to save my soul. Nor could the all our primal mother lost, that is, Eden lost by Eve, ensure my cheeks, which he once washed with dew, should not again be sullied with dark tears.
Dante, that Virgil is no longer here. Do not yet weep. Do not yet weep for that. A different sword cut first must make you weep.
From stern to prow some admiral will pace to see how well in other hulls the captains fare, and seek to hearten them to do their best. So also, left along the chariot, turning around to hear my own name voiced, I hear recorded of necessity, I saw my Donna, who'd at first appeared hidden in garlands of angelic joy, fixed from beyond the brook her eyes on me, though still the veil descending from her brows, encircled with Minerva's olive fronds, did not allow distinctly any sight of her. Her look was stern and proud, and with sovereign strength she then went on, and spoke as though she still held back until the last her fieriest words.
Look, I am Beatrice. What right had you to venture to this mount? Did you not know that all are happy here?
Next slide, please. My eyes fell, glancing to the spring-clear brook, but seeing me in that, shame bent my brow. I dragged my gaze back to the grassy bank. A mother to her son looked stern and proud. So she appeared to me. For true concern is bitter to the taste and quick to sting. She didn't speak, but suddenly, as one, all the angels there sang In te Domine speravi, but did not go beyond the pedes meos. Compare. The snow that falls through growing eaves freezes the spine of Italy in drifts, blown and compacted by Slavonian winds. But when the southern lands, where shadow fails, breathe once again, within itself it thaws, and then trickles down, as candles melt in flames. So too, until those beings sang, their notes are all concordant with the heavenly spheres, I'd been there uttering no sigh or tear, yet on hearing through these harmonies their pity on me, it seemed they had said, why, lady, are you causing such discord as this? The ice, so tightly stretched around my core, turned now to breath and water issuing at mouth and eye in spasms from the heart. Then she, still leftwards on the chariot, unmoved and standing firm, addressed her words to those true beings who were so compassionate.
You wake in vigil through eternal day, so neither night nor sleep can steal from you a single step that time takes traveling by. Thus answering, my greater care must be that he in tears there grasps what I intend and brings balance to all his grief and guilt. Not only by the work of heaven's great wheels that send with its companion stars each seed along the road toward its rightful end, but also by those holy generosities that rain in grace from clouded powers so high that human sight can come in no way near. This man, through all his new life, fresh and young, in virtual power, was one who might have proved in all his behavior wonderful. Yet there on earth, the richer soil may be the more, untilled or sown with evil seed, its vigor turns to wilderness and bane. I, looking on, sustained him for a time. My eyes, when bright with youth, I turned to him and led him with me on the road to truth. Then, on the threshold of my second age, I changed, took a different life, and he at once drew back and yielded to another's glance. Risen from body into spirit form, my goodness, power, and beauty grew more strong. Yet I to him was then less dear, less pleasing. He turned his steps to paths that were not true. He followed images of failing good which cannot meet in full their promises. And when I prayed that he might be inspired, seeking to call him back by dreams and other ways, all that came to nothing. He paid little heed. He fell so far that every other means to save this man by now came short, unless he saw himself those people who are lost. I went then to the doorway of the dead, and weeping, my entreaties there were borne to one who, since, has brought him to these heights. God's high decree would shatter, though, if he should pass by the Lethe and go on to taste the food of life, yet leave unpaid the tax of penitence, which pours out flowing tears.
Continue.
You who are there beyond the sacred stream, turning the sword, or you, that's you.
Now she turns the sword of her words. The point is turned to me. The edge alone had seemed quite keen enough. So without lapse, continuing, she began.
Say if this is true. To such a change, your own confession needs to be conjoined. My natural powers by
My natural powers by now were just so confused that my voice began to move, and yet it gave out before it cleared the larynx and the throat. She bore this for a while, and then she said,
"Respond to me. Your wretched memories have not been struck, though, yet by the Lethe stream."
Fear and confusion intermixed in me, drove from my lips, yes, so hard to hear. It needed sight to make it understood. A crossbow triggered under too much stress snaps its own string and splinters at the arc. Its shaft thus hits the target with less force. I burst in that same way beneath the load, and shedding streams of sighs and sobs and tears, my voice came slack and slow along its course, and so Beatrice continued.
In your desire for me, which then was leading you to love the good beyond which we cannot aspire to reach, what ditches or what chains across your path did you discover that led you to strip the hopes you had of getting further on? What easements, profits, gain, or benefit displayed themselves to you on other brows that you preferred to flounce within their sight?
I drew the bitterest of sighs. But then I hardly had the voice left to respond. My lips were laboring to give the words some form. Weeping, I said, mere things of here and now, with their false pleasures, turned my steps away. The moment that your face had hid itself.
Had you been silent or denied what you confess, your guilt would equally have been observed. It's known to such a judge. But when the plea of guilty in this court bursts, freely uttered from the sinner's cheek, the grindstone here will turn against the blade. And yet, so you may bear the proper shame your error brings, and hearing once again the siren call, you may show greater strength. Put to one side the seed that nurtures tears. Listen and hear how down a different path my flesh, when buried, should have made you move. Never had art or nature shown to you such beauty and delight as did those limbs in which I was enclosed, now strewn in earth. And if that great delight, because I died, did fail for you, what other dying thing should then have drawn you to desire of it? Pierced by the arrows of fallacious things, you should at once have raised yourself on high to follow me, I being none such now. You ought not to have weighed your feathers down just to be stricken by some girl or other novelty of short-lived use. A newborn chick will take a blow or two, but arrows fly and nets are spread in vain before the eyes of any fully fledged.
You have little boys who stand there dumb with shame, eyes on the ground and listening to what's said, aware, very sorry of what they are. So I, too, simply stood. And Beatrice said,
Since you grieve at what you're hearing, raise your beard, and looking up, you'll feel still greater pain.
with less resistance, some well-sinewed oak is rooted out by northern winds of ours, or bless. From savage Iarbas' Libyan realm, and I, at her command, raised up my chin. And when she spoke of beard, to name my face, I knew the venom that her meaning bore. But as I stretched out to show my face to her, those primal creatures, as my eyes observed, had ceased in scattering their arc of flowers. Those lights of mine, very far from shore, saw Beatrice turn toward the beast, the griffin, being two natures, and in person one. Beneath her veil, beyond the flowing stream, she overcame, it seemed, what once she'd been, when once, as here, she overcame all women. The nettle of remorse stung so sharp. Whatever else had drawn me most to love became for me my utmost enemy. It gnawed my heart, the consciousness of this. That overwhelmed, I fell. What I became, she knows, who was the cause of why I did. Then when my heart gave back outward powers, the other woman, the Donna, Matilda, whom I'd found there by the stream, said, grip me, grip me. She'd taken me to the waters, pulling me behind her, across the wave. Asperges me was heard. He's dunked in the Lethe. His sins are forgiven. Go to the next one. There it is. Good. That's the image. Good. All right, stop sharing screen. We've only got a few minutes. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to ask the question this way. And this was asked to every man and every woman in this group. How many of you think Beatrice's the therapist you might need if you were in Dante's position? Thumbs up? Is there a thumbs up signal? Let me see if I can. Oh. Okay, you just do it with your own fingers. Is she a good therapist? Some say yes. Well, some say they don't want to vote. Can somebody show me their... Oh, Catherine's vigorous. Who gave us a no? Adam said no.
She's a terror, though.
She's a terror. Brian, would she be kicked out of the program?
Depends what style she was going for. For some intensive short term, she might make the grade.
She might. Well, but why then, Adam, would you fire her?
Pardon?
Turn your mic on.
She said, if you thought that hurt, just wait a minute and it'll be even worse.
Isn't that one of the best lines you ever heard? I mean, you kind of want to save that line. What? Like, hey, you're crying, but listen, save it. Because when I get through with you, you are going to be a puddle, a river of tears. No, it's pretty good, though. She's got away with words, but it's cruel, huh?
Pretty harsh, yeah.
She's harsh. Is this what... You're nodding, Janet. I mean, is this what the guy needs? Or anybody? Who wants to speak up for Beatrice? Why does this woman, who's been the image of beauty and goodness and truth, come down so hard on Dante? Why is this moment considered kind of, in one way, the climax, at least up to this point, of the poem? Why is it important? I'm going to go to Sam Perrin. I don't know Sam as being a sentimental soul. He will tell the truth. Erica's got a hand up. Good. So after Sam, we'll hear Erica. Sam?
Well, I think that she says right at the end of Canto 30 that every other means to save this man came short. And so I think that if you are going to reject Beatrice's methods here, then you're going to condemn Dante. This is the only way to save him, that he has to be taken through the inferno and up purgatory for his own sake.
Okay, and next, turn your microphone on, Erica.
I was just going to say, this is Dante writing in exile over about so many things. I think that's where this oomph and angst and power is coming from. There's probably some of his own feelings of I should have done or should have done this or should have done that coming into it.
When you say that, I can't help but think of what Brian said about self-laceration being the easier path than a constructive way of going forward. Is this a constructive way of going forward, or is this the poet self-lacerating with the pilgrim being brought to his knees?
I would say it's the latter. I mean, there have been times when I have definitely needed a very strong, order, get up and do such and such. But what's most helpful with me is usually a self-revelation, not for the sake of shame, but for the sake of recognizing and changing. But I do think people tend to have grief and disappointment, and I think they may be stuck in a place of self-laceration, as you say.
Others? Please, Colleen.
I just kept thinking through the whole time, why does she's in heaven, she's in paradise, and she's so focused on him in the human world, and it just seems almost a weird place for her. Like in our town, when the Emily is with the dead, all the dead people, and they kind of let her know that like they're removed from the world, that the world is happening, and that and that's Emily in our town struggles with that,
Yeah.
and wants to go back because she's not ready to let go of the world, and experiences the world in the way that only someone who's not alive can. But it seems odd that Beatrice would be so invested in the world.
It is. It's so particular. Now, of course, Mary sent Lucy to Beatrice. Look, this is your guy that you care about, but it's so particular. It's such a particular relationship, and it does seem odd.
Yeah.
We're going to spend the next part, of course, in Paradise. I just want to remind Lizette, Lizette and Chad, that we're going to need 5 more minutes. So keep the cameras going, recording going, and please don't forget to copy the chat because it's publishable. I just keep reading these wonderful things. Megan, could I turn to you, Megan McComb, for a second? I mean, you've, like Brian, worked with people in, in suicidal despair, yes?
Yes.
And the dark wood, where he is in the beginning, is sometimes read as that kind of despair. Where's the virtue in what Beatrice is doing here? Do you see it? Do you hear it?
So I don't know if this approach would be super successful on a suicide crisis hotline. This is not what we teach in our crisis line training. However, it sounds like she's sort of, speaking truth. I was reading this the other night and just like kind of in shock of how harsh some of it was coming across. But the impression I get was like some of the softer interventions did not help. And Dante kind of kept going deeper down into his sin and his vice. And then she kept trying to save him and it was not working. And so I do think there's a point where kind of addressing someone openly and honestly, when they're able to receive it, could be helpful. And I think what I found interesting, and I don't know if anyone else feels the same way, I felt that by this point, after going through the Inferno and Purgatorio, like Dante already seemed pretty humble to me. And he also seemed kind of like terrified of her to begin with. So it was odd. He's just like absolutely overwhelmed by her presence already. So you would think you would be like, oh, I'm so happy to see you. You've like gone through all this change and transformation, and said, bam, like more criticism.
Yeah. Virgil gave him crown and mitered him over himself. So, okay, good. We're going to have time for Suzanne. Let's go with John very briefly.
So real quick question. So in Inferno, the punishments fit the crime. In Purgatorio, the healing, the methods of healing fit the vices. And I think Beatrice is exactly what Virgil needed. she might have
He doesn't
reacted to
need a
somebody else very
dewy-eyed
different.
lovers reunion, right? He doesn't need like, oh, there's the girl of my dreams. He certainly doesn't need that at this point. I mean, this is a particular personal relationship, and if lust is as important as we were arguing earlier, then what you're saying, John, is this is exactly the intervention he needed.
Right, right. Somebody else would
Suzanne?
deal something else.
Suzanne?
Well, I was just going to say, I think a lot of it has to do with the imagery of Beatrice, right? She's beautiful. He's put her on this pedestal of this. And so you're not expecting someone in that lovely space to be so firm and straightforward and true. So if it was some other person saying that same thing, what's the difference? It's just how the imagery of this beauty and love has kind of come to life. And it's probably best it comes from that than something other. At least,
Catherine, you had your go,
at
please,
least
Suzanne, finish.
how, I'm looking at this as a 2026 woman.
Yeah, yeah. And you are too, Catherine. I mean, you just inhabited the role. I mean, is this what Dante needs?
Of course. Yeah. I mean, what have we just been doing here? We've been watching him learn for this past 2 hours about disordered loves. And right before, as he's making it through the flames of lust, which is the one punishment on Mountain Purgatory that he actually experiences himself. He witnesses the others. He walks through the flames of lust himself. And Virgil's on the other side going like, you're about to see her. She's right there. And he's like, I can do it. I can do it. And so he's expecting a super joyful reunion with this woman. But what have we learned about disordered, improper love? And that is basically almost this false love that he's been carrying. This Beatrice that he's made is what has gotten him this far to not entirely ill effect. Like his invention of Beatrice has had a good effect on him, but she's here to say, to coax a confession out of him, first of all, because he fell for, as soon as she died, he turned his attention to something else. Like that's what her speech is about. Like, how did my love transport you to God while I was on earth? And then the second I die and go to heaven, you're like, oh, never mind. I know this other woman, or I have these other pursuits. That's what you're angry about.
I was going to say, he idolizes her. He's created an idol.
And that when we get to paradise, the question will be, is she an idol continued, or is she an icon? Is she leading him to God? Is she seeing Christ in her eyes? He writes a book before this called La Vita Nuova, and it's really about Beatrice. And he connects Beatrice to the Trinity and to Christ throughout that book. When she dies, there's another woman that appears. So sometimes it's read as his interest goes to another woman. Sometimes it's read as, well, he writes the Convivio, which is very philosophically oriented, not very theological. Suffice it to say that Dante hasn't come to that point. It's weird. He has engaged in the penance, but he hasn't done the penitence and the confession. And that's what we get here. What we get in the next two cantos is another pageant. It's the story of the corruption of the church. And then there's a kind of prelude to Paradiso. That's where we go next. But I am really looking forward to it. I think we're about 5 minutes over time, or roughly 4. I'm going to just ask, is there any final word? I'm looking at these. What did the real life Beatrice feel toward Dante? Very good question, Megan. I don't know that we know, do we? There's paintings that capture what he describes in the new life. Hey, where's Dana? Are you still with us, Dana? Did you just turn your mic on just for 1 second? Did you go to the church where you first saw her? He's a 9-year-old kid. He sees this 8-year-old girl, and he never forgets her for the rest of his life. That's it. And they marry different people, right? When she dies in 1290, he's married to Gemma. She's married to another person, a Portinari, and but there it is. She's the image of the true, the good, and the beautiful. Did you go there? Where'd you go, Dana, in Florence?
I did. I was able to see Santa Margherita and Santa Croce, and it was really amazing just to kind of walk the city through Dante's perspective and kind of think about how he must have contemplated all these ideas, in 14th century
Yeah.
Florence, and it was really special. And I particularly loved the Badia monastery.
Yeah, which is right around the corner.
Yes.
A beautiful church he makes reference to. Yeah.
Yes.
And did you go to the service there where they're singing?
I did. There was beautiful
Beautiful.
Gregorian chants, and
Yeah.
it just was something special. So I think I recommend when we're done this session, we all need to take a field trip.
I think Chad and Lizette are taking note. There is, in fact, in July, going to be a reunion in Florence. And I think if you write to Chad and Lizette, you can sign up for that. Okay. So thank you. Thanks to everybody. We must go now. I really enjoyed this so much. And I really look forward to next month when we turn to Paradise. And Dana, will you play the role of Picarda, the poor nun who was taken out of the convent
Sure.
against her will?
Sure.
You know, Dante says to her, "You're only in the moon. Don't you want a better spot in the stadium?" Has anybody said, wait a second, there's hierarchy in heaven? Has anybody? Uh-oh. To be continued. Good night, everybody.
Good
Time
night,
to go.
everybody. Thank
Good night.
you.
Thank you. Thank
Thank
you.
you, Paul.
Thank
Be well.
you.
Thanks so much. Thanks to all the presenters today. Fabulous.